Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into the darkest corners of royal power, a look at kings throughout history who committed the most horrific acts to stay on their thrones. History often remembers kings as noble rulers, warriors, or builders of empires. But hidden beneath the crowns and glory are stories of paranoia, cruelty, and terror. Decisions made not out of wisdom, but out of fear of losing power. From the ancient world to modern times, rulers have proven that the greatest threats to their reigns were not always foreign enemies, but their own people, their families, their nobles, their rivals. And to preserve their power, some kings crossed lines that still shock us today. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, stay tuned and leave a comment letting us know where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always amusing to find out who is joining us from around the world. Now dim the light and maybe turn on the fan for a soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin in the ancient Near East with a king remembered as both a great builder and a monster, Herod the Great of Judea. Herod came to power in 37 BCE, supported by Rome, and ruled Judea as a client king. In many ways, his reign looked impressive. He rebuilt Jerusalem, constructed fortresses like Masada, and began the grand renovation of the Second Temple. Yet beneath the polished image of a ruler favored by Rome lay a man consumed by paranoia. Herod lived in constant fear that plots were brewing against him, sometimes real, often imagined, and he responded with ruthless brutality. Herod's reign became infamous for his family murders. He executed his own wife, Mariamne, after suspecting her of conspiracy. He killed his mother-in-law. He executed 3 of his sons, Alexander, Aristobulus, and Antipater, all accused of treason. Augustus, the Roman emperor himself, joked bitterly that it was safer to be Herod's pig than his son. But the cruelty that cemented his legacy in legend is the so-called massacre of the innocents. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Herod, upon hearing of the birth of a child who might be the Messiah, a potential rival king, ordered the killing of all male infants in Bethlehem. Whether the massacre happened exactly as described remains debated by historians, but the fact that the story attached itself to Herod speaks volumes about how he was remembered. A ruler so feared, so loathed, that infanticide seemed believable. Herod's paranoia extended beyond his family. He built elaborate fortresses across Judea, not just to defend against foreign attack, but to provide himself with safe havens should his own people revolt. His legacy became one of contradiction, admired for his architectural achievements, reviled for the terror he inflicted on those closest to him. In the end, Herod died sick, despised, and tormented by the ghosts of those he had executed. But his example set a chilling precedent that would echo through history, that when kings fear losing their crowns, no bond of family, faith, or humanity is safe. Herod's cruelty cannot be understood without looking at the fragile position he occupied. He ruled not as an independent monarch, but as a client of Rome, propped up by foreign power. To his subjects, devout Jews who yearned for autonomy and a righteous ruler, Herod was seen as a usurper, half Jewish by heritage and fully Roman by allegiance. This lack of legitimacy gnawed at him, and paranoia became his constant companion. The murder of his wife Mariamne remains one of the darkest episodes of his reign. Mariamne was a Hasmonean princess, descended from the line of Jewish high priests. Her marriage to Herod was meant to strengthen his claim to the throne. But rather than secure his position, it heightened his insecurity. He feared that her royal blood made her more beloved than himself, and whispers of plots were all it took for him to have her executed. This act shocked the kingdom, for Mariamne had been adored by the people. In killing her, Herod destroyed not only his family, but also whatever fragile goodwill he had earned among his subjects. Herod's paranoia did not stop there. Convinced that Mariamne's sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, might grow up to avenge their mother, he had them strangled. His eldest son, Antipater, fared no better. Accused of plotting against him, he too was executed, only days before Herod's own death. By the end of his reign, the man who had once sought to create a dynasty had systematically eliminated much of his own bloodline. The cruelty extended beyond his household. Herod's subjects suffered under heavy taxation necessary to fund his grand building projects and tributes to Rome. He crushed dissent with ruthless efficiency, stationing spies to root out conspiracies. Fortresses such as Herodium and Masada were constructed not only as architectural marvels, but as personal escape routes where Herod could retreat if rebellion broke out. They stand today as symbols of his paranoia carved into stone. Perhaps the most grotesque glimpse into Herod's psyche comes from the account of his death. Racked by disease and tormented by a reputation of hatred, Herod feared that no one would mourn him. According to the historian Josephus, he devised a horrific plan. He ordered the arrest of prominent Jewish leaders and instructed that they be executed upon his death, ensuring that grief would fill the land even if it was not for him. Though this command was never carried out, the very fact that he conceived it shows the depth of his obsession with power and legacy. Herod the Great remains one of history's most contradictory figures. He left behind dazzling monuments, including the foundations of what would become one of the most sacred sites in Jerusalem. Yet his memory is stained with blood. The wives, sons, and innocents he destroyed in the name of power. His life illustrates a truth that will echo throughout this series, that kings who cling to power too tightly often crush everything around them, and in the process destroy themselves. By the time Herod died in 4 BCE, his kingdom was a mixture of grandeur and bitterness. On one hand, he had transformed Judea with projects that impressed even his Roman patrons: aqueducts, fortresses, theaters, and above all, the expansion of the temple in Jerusalem. On the other hand, his name had become synonymous with tyranny. Herod's paranoia ensured that his reign ended in isolation. Surrounded by flatterers and fearful servants, stripped of genuine family bonds by his own hand, he died loathed by the very people he had sought to rule. His funeral was lavish, as befitted a king, but it could not erase the memory of the blood that had been spilled. In the centuries that followed, his name lived on in infamy. To Christians, he became the archetype of a cruel tyrant because of the biblical story of the massacre of the innocents. To Jewish historians, he was remembered as the usurper who bowed to Rome and murdered his own kin. Even his architectural achievements, though admired, could not fully redeem him. Herod's reign shows how fear can twist a ruler into a destroyer. Obsessed with survival, he annihilated the very legacy he hoped to preserve. In clinging to power, he ensured that his memory would endure, not as Herod the Great, but as Herod the Terrible. If Herod embodied paranoia, then Nero, emperor of Rome from 54 to 68 CE, embodied the cruelty of indulgence. Few rulers in history have left behind a reputation so soaked in blood, scandal, and fire. To Romans, Nero became the archetype of the mad emperor, a ruler who valued spectacle over governance, who destroyed family, rivals, and even his empire itself in his desperate attempt to cling to power. Nero was born in 37 CE as Lucius Domitius Aenobarbus, the son of Agrippina the Younger, a fiercely ambitious woman from the Julio-Claudian dynasty. His path to power was paved not by his own strength, but by his mother's ruthless political maneuvering. Agrippina married Emperor Claudius, persuaded him to adopt her son, and ensured that Nero was named heir over Claudius's biological son, Britannicus. When Claudius died suddenly in 54 CE, widely believed to have been poisoned by Agrippina, Nero, at only 16 years old, became emperor of the greatest empire in the world. At first, Rome rejoiced. The boy emperor was handsome, charismatic, and youthful. Under the guidance of wise advisors like Seneca and Burrus, his reign began with optimism. But the veneer of promise soon cracked. Nero quickly grew tired of governing and became obsessed with theater, music, and chariot racing, pursuits the Romans considered shameful for an emperor. The real turning point came when Nero realized that power was fragile. To secure it, he needed to remove every potential threat. The first victim was Britannicus, Claudius's true son. Though still young, Britannicus represented a direct rival to Nero's claim. During a banquet in 55 CE, Britannicus suddenly collapsed, foaming at the mouth. Nero feigned ignorance, but everyone suspected poison. At just 17 years old, Nero had murdered his stepbrother and solidified his throne with blood. But paranoia, once fed, only grows. Soon, Nero turned on the very woman who had made him emperor, his mother, Agrippina. Their relationship had always been strained. She sought to control him, and he resented her influence. As Nero grew more independent, Agrippina became dangerous. She was a powerful political figure in her own right, with allies in the Senate and army, and her survival threatened his absolute control. The plots to kill her became infamous. First, Nero designed a collapsible boat meant to sink at sea, drowning her quietly. When Agrippina miraculously swam to shore and survived, Nero panicked. Realizing subtlety would not work, he sent assassins to her villa. According to ancient sources, when they confronted her, she bared her womb and cried, "Strike here where the monster was born." They obliged, stabbing her to death. With Agrippina gone, Nero had crossed a line. He had murdered his own mother, the woman who had placed the crown upon his head. From that point onward, cruelty and excess would dominate his reign, and Rome would pay the price. The murder of Agrippina was a turning point. It stripped Nero of the last restraints on his behavior. He no longer had to answer to a domineering mother or worry about her influence. But with her gone, paranoia deepened, and indulgence took its place. Nero became less a ruler and more a performer upon the imperial stage. By the early 60s CE, Rome was descending into chaos under his rule. Nero lavished money on extravagant games, theatrical performances, and building projects, while neglecting the business of state. His obsession with the arts knew no bounds. He sang, acted, and played the lyre in public, shocking Rome's aristocracy, who believed such performances were beneath an emperor. His ego demanded not only admiration, but worship, and those who refused often met grim ends. But Nero's most infamous moment came in 64 CE, when a devastating fire consumed much of Rome. The inferno raged for 6 days, destroying homes, temples, and entire districts. Ancient accounts vary, but the rumor that Nero himself had set the fire, or at least allowed it to burn while he sang of Troy's destruction, spread rapidly. Whether or not he started it, Nero's actions in the aftermath cemented his reputation. Instead of helping the people, he seized vast swaths of burned land to build his extravagant Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a sprawling palace complex with gilded halls, artificial lakes, and gardens fit for a god. The citizens of Rome were furious. To deflect blame, Nero needed scapegoats. He found them in a small, marginalized religious group, the Christians. Though still relatively unknown, they were viewed with suspicion by Roman society. Nero accused them of starting the fire and unleashed a wave of horrific persecution. Christians were arrested, tortured, and executed in grotesque public spectacles. Some were torn apart by wild beasts in the arena, others crucified, and many burned alive, serving as human torches to light Nero's nighttime games. These persecutions marked one of the first major clashes between the Roman state and Christianity, and they etched Nero's name in infamy for centuries to come. Early Christian writers immortalized him as the embodiment of cruelty, even hinting at him as a figure of the Antichrist. Meanwhile, Rome groaned under his excesses. His endless spending bankrupted the treasury, leading to heavier taxation and widespread resentment. Conspiracies brewed in the Senate and the military. Nero responded with purges, executing senators, nobles, and even close advisors he suspected of betrayal. One by one, those who had once guided him, including the philosopher Seneca, were forced to commit suicide under his orders. By the mid-60s, Nero's Rome was no longer ruled by law, but by fear. The emperor who had begun as a youthful hope for renewal had transformed into a tyrant who burned his city, scapegoated his people, and silenced opposition with blood. But his paranoia had one more victim yet to claim: his own dynasty. If Nero's reign had begun with optimism, it ended in blood, scandal, and humiliation. The emperor's paranoia extended not just to senators and citizens, but also to his own household. Like Herod before him, Nero turned on those closest to him. His first wife, Octavia, daughter of the late Emperor Claudius, was married to him as part of his rise to power. She was admired for her dignity and restraint, but she failed to give Nero an heir. This, combined with his infatuation with his mistress Poppaea Sabina, sealed her fate. Nero divorced Octavia on charges of infertility. When the Roman people protested, seeing Octavia as a victim, Nero ordered her banished, then executed on fabricated charges of adultery. Her death only deepened his reputation for cruelty. Poppaea Sabina, the mistress for whom Nero had abandoned Octavia, fared little better. Ancient historians recount a shocking scene. During a heated argument, Nero kicked Poppaea while she was pregnant, killing both her and the unborn child. This act of uncontrolled rage horrified even his supporters. Though Nero later remarried and even staged elaborate ceremonies, including one infamous mock marriage to a male freedman whom he dressed as a woman, his relationships were marred by violence, excess, and theatricality rather than stability. Meanwhile, unrest across the empire grew worse. Rebellions erupted in Gaul, Spain, and even among the Praetorian Guard, the emperor's own protectors. The Senate, once his reluctant tool, began to whisper of replacing him. Nero's response was more purges, more executions, and more desperate displays of grandeur. But the tide was turning. By 68 CE, Rome was collapsing under the weight of his misrule. The final blow came when the governor of Gaul, Gaius Julius Vindex, revolted, followed by other generals in Spain and Africa. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy, the ultimate disgrace for a Roman emperor. Abandoned by his allies, deserted by his guards, Nero fled the city in disguise. Hiding in a villa outside Rome, he heard the sounds of soldiers approaching. Terrified of capture and public humiliation, Nero resolved to end his life. But even then, he could not summon the courage. According to legend, he begged his companions to kill him, crying, "What an artist dies in me!" In the end, with the help of a loyal servant, Nero stabbed himself in the throat, ending his reign at just 30 years old. His death plunged Rome into chaos, the year of the 4 emperors, but his legacy lived on. To later generations, Nero became the embodiment of tyranny, a ruler who murdered family, burned his city, and ruled through cruelty and fear. His name became shorthand for the corruption of absolute power. In the 3rd century BCE, China was not yet the vast empire we know today. Instead, it was a patchwork of rival states locked in centuries of brutal warfare. Out of this chaos rose a man whose ambition knew no limits, Ying Zhang, who would crown himself Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. His achievements were extraordinary. He unified the warring states, standardized laws and measures, and laid the foundation for imperial China. But the methods he used to secure and maintain power were horrific, marked by mass executions, forced labor, and ruthless suppression of dissent. Ying Zheng was born in 259 BCE, heir to the throne of the Qin state. Qin was already the most militarized of the Chinese kingdoms, known for strict discipline and efficient governance under the legalist philosophy. From a young age, Zheng was surrounded by intrigue and danger. His mother's affairs and the ambitions of rival ministers nearly cost him his throne. Yet Zheng proved himself shrewd and relentless. By 221 BCE, through conquest and diplomacy, he had defeated the other 6 major states, Han, Zhao, Yan, Wei, Chu, and Qi, unifying China for the first time in history. Declaring himself Shi Huangdi, first emperor, he sought to erase the chaos of the past and ensure that no rival could ever challenge him again. But unity came at a terrible price. The new empire was built not on harmony, but on fear. Qin Shi Huangdi standardized weights, measures, and even axle lengths for carts to improve trade and control. He imposed a uniform system of laws across China, enforced by brutal punishments. Even minor offenses could result in mutilation or death. Collective punishment was common. If one person broke the law, their entire family might be executed. But his most infamous act was the burning of books and burying of scholars alive. In 213 BCE, fearing that intellectual debate would undermine his authority, Qin Shi Huang ordered the destruction of philosophical and historical texts that did not support legalism. Confucian classics, histories of rival states, and works of free thought were consigned to flames. The following year, when scholars protested, he had more than 400 Confucian intellectuals executed, buried alive, according to legend, to silence dissent. The message was clear. The emperor's word was truth, and no other narrative would be tolerated. Qin Shi Huang also demanded total loyalty from his subjects. To prevent uprisings, he ordered the forced relocation of powerful families to the capital, where he could keep them under surveillance. He dismantled the walls of conquered states, so no city could fortify itself against him. He built an extensive system of roads and canals, useful for commerce, but also for moving troops swiftly to crush rebellions. The cost of his projects was staggering. His most ambitious undertaking was the precursor to the Great Wall of China, a vast defensive barrier built by connecting and expanding older regional walls. Hundreds of thousands of peasants, prisoners, and conscripts labored under brutal conditions. Many died of exhaustion, exposure, and starvation, their bodies buried within the wall itself. Qin Shi Huang may have ended the Warring States period, but he replaced it with a reign of terror. For the first time, China was unified, but it was unity forged in blood, bone, and fear. For all his ruthlessness, Qin Shi Huang feared one enemy above all others: death. Having unified China by the sword, he became obsessed with ensuring that his power would never fade. His paranoia, already immense, grew into a fixation with immortality that consumed the latter years of his reign. The emperor surrounded himself with alchemists, astrologers, and magicians who promised secrets to eternal life. He dispatched expeditions in search of mythical islands where immortals were said to dwell. One famous mission, led by an alchemist named Shu Fu, sailed east with hundreds of young men and women. Legend says they never returned. Some believe they settled in Japan. Others say Shu Fu simply abandoned the task, knowing the emperor's wrath would be fatal if he returned empty-handed. Meanwhile, Qin Shi Huang ingested countless elixirs of immortality, concocted from mercury, jade powder, and other exotic substances. Ironically, these medicines were toxic, slowly poisoning his body and mind. By the final years of his reign, he was plagued by paranoia, insomnia, and hallucinations, the very symptoms of mercury poisoning. His fear of death also made him deeply suspicious of those around him. He rarely slept in the same palace 2 nights in a row, traveling constantly to avoid assassination. He employed elaborate body doubles and kept his movements secret, even from his own ministers. Court records suggest he trusted almost no one, relying instead on harsh laws and spies to maintain control. But his most enduring obsession manifested in stone and clay. His tomb complex at Mount Li, guarded by the legendary Terracotta Army. Construction began soon after he took the throne and continued throughout his reign, employing hundreds of thousands of laborers. The tomb was not a simple burial site. It was an empire in miniature, meant to replicate his rule in the afterlife. According to ancient historian Sima Qian, the underground palace contained rivers of mercury flowing through bronze channels to represent the Yangtze and Yellow rivers. The ceilings were said to be painted with stars, creating a cosmic replica of the heavens. The most famous feature, unearthed in the 20th century, was the army of over 8,000 life-size terracotta soldiers, each with unique faces, armor, and weapons. This clay legion was meant to protect the emperor in eternity, a silent reminder of his desire to control even death itself. The construction was as brutal as it was ambitious. Countless laborers died during the decades-long project, their graves unmarked. Some accounts claim that workers who knew the tomb's secrets were sealed inside after its completion and tombed alive to prevent looting or betrayal. Thus, Qin Shi Huang's dream of immortality was not only symbolic, but also literal. He sought to surround himself with walls, armies, and rivers of poison even in death, ensuring that his reign extended beyond the grave. But fate would not be so kind. His paranoia and poisonous elixirs brought him down sooner than he expected. In 210 BCE, while on one of his endless inspection tours across his empire, Qin Shi Huang's body finally gave way. The emperor who sought eternal life died at the age of 49. Ironically, his desperate consumption of immortality elixirs made from mercury may have hastened his end. His paranoia had been justified in one sense. His death immediately unleashed the instability he had feared all along. His passing was shrouded in secrecy. Fearing that news of his death might spark uprisings, his closest advisors hid the truth as the imperial procession made its way back to the capital. They even transported his corpse in a wagon of rotting fish to disguise the stench of decay. Meanwhile, they forged documents in his name to maintain control. But the empire Qin Shi Huang had built through terror and blood was fragile. His son and successor, Qin Ershi, lacked his father's ruthless charisma and soon faced widespread revolts. Within just a few years of the first emperor's death, the Qin dynasty collapsed, replaced by the Han. The man who had sought to build an eternal empire saw it unravel almost instantly. And yet, despite the horrors of his rule, Qin Shi Huang's impact was undeniable. He had unified China for the first time in history, establishing institutions that endured long after his dynasty fell. The standardized laws, currencies, and systems of government he imposed became the backbone of future Chinese empires. Even his brutal suppression of dissent created a model of centralized authority that shaped Chinese political culture for centuries. The physical remnants of his reign testify to both his ambition and his cruelty. The Great Wall, though later rebuilt and expanded, began as his project, erected with the bones of countless laborers. The terracotta army, unearthed in the 20th century, revealed the scale of his tomb complex and the lengths to which he went to prepare for eternity. Each clay soldier, with its unique features, is a silent witness to the empire's obsession with control and permanence. Qin Shi Huang remains a figure of paradox. To some, he is the founding father of China, a visionary who ended centuries of chaos and laid the foundations of a civilization. To others, he is remembered as a tyrant who burned books, buried scholars, and sacrificed countless lives for his own glory. He unified a land, but at the cost of terror. He sought immortality, but became immortal only through infamy. In the end, the emperor who feared death more than anything could not escape it. His dynasty crumbled, but his name lived on, bound forever to the story of China itself. Qin Shi Huang proved that power gained through fear may endure for a moment, but fear alone cannot secure eternity. With that, my friends, we have come to an end of this video. If this video has helped you into your slumber, sleep tight and have a sweet dream. If you were able to learn from this video, I will consider myself successful in teaching you about the ruthless tyrants throughout history. If you want to help this channel out, you have done so by watching this far into the video. If you want to learn about the greatest mind in human history, you can do so by clicking the video on the screen. Thank you, and see you on the next video. And subscribe, because we'll have videos like these that might make you a tiny bit smarter every time you go to bed.